Well, I do remember the 60s. I was born in 1960, and of course, my parents were of the World War II generation. So I remember when rock and roll came in. I remember the first rock song when I was 6 on summer camp bus was I'm Henry VIII I Am, I think, which was Herman Hermits. And then I remember we went on a trip when I was 8, and there was a jukebox, and a bunch of older teenagers were playing Summer in the City by the Loving Spoonful, and that was the first time I heard rock, and real rock, and we loved it. I remember my parents listening when Woodstock was going on. I was in New York, and I remember them being horrified at all of the of the reports that were coming from Woodstock. I remember when the Beatles broke up in the early 1970s, when disco came in, when punk came in, which was kind of a rebellion, I think, against the disco era. And so I kind of remember it all. But I remember rock really reflecting the moods that were going on, the rebellion, then the kind of let's just dance after the 1960s, ever the 70s, and then that kind of really rebellious spirit coming back in with punk rock in the 1980s. So
that's awesome.
Those are my memories.
When did you hear a Beethoven symphony, and do you know which one it was?
Well, of course, I was a big fan of Bugs Bunny, and Beethoven's Fifth was always in the cartoons. That was exactly. So it was really those cartoons, actually, which introduced me to classical music. And I remember the first time, I think I listened all the way through, was when I was in college, and I think it was the Sixth, I think, the Sixth Symphony first, and then since that time I've heard several of them performed. But it was always Bugs Bunny, and those cartoons and those shows that introduced you, it was also to opera. I know that this is not related, but there was a show in the early 70s called The Odd Couple, and they used to have opera singers from the New York Opera there. And the first time my father dragged us to an opera, I was bored as heck. And then all of a sudden, Di Provenza came on. It was La Traviata, which we'd heard on The Odd Couple. And we all sat up and went, The Odd Couple! And I've loved opera ever since. And it was the same way with classical music. It was really those cartoons that got us listening very early on.